So this video isn't so much about coding this time, but it's more about what do I want, or what does a user want from a text editor, or at least like what are your options as to what would make a text editor desirable for you. And like if you watch my videos, you'll notice that I tend to use VS Code a lot, but there's other editors as well, like Sublime and Atom and things. I've used a whole ton of them in the past. Back in the day, actually, one of the things that I did use, or not, I did use when I was doing VBA in Excel. Their editor was quite nice, although you couldn't do any dark mode. But some of the editing features were quite nice. But what am I looking for in a text editor? Or at least what do a lot of people look for? I think the first thing, and I'll probably maybe even make a little list here, but we'll go through some of them. I think the first thing is that you don't want to pay for it, so free or paid for. Right. There's plenty of IDEs that are very good and they offer you a number of features, but you have to pay for them. But there's many of them that you don't have to pay for. I wonder if I've actually got Notepad++ on my PC as well. Yes, I do. I've got Notepad plus plus, and this is an example of an editor. It's a very lightweight editor. So I'll bring this one up just so it's comparable. I've also used Sublime. There are three things that I've got that are currently running, and I had to use Sublime in Linux, and I'll go into that in a second. Because I sing the praises of VS Code, but it's got some downfalls as well. I haven't used Notepad, literally haven't opened Notepad++ for months and months. Update existing packages. Do you want to download it? So it's quite nice that here you got another editor, very lightweight. I'll hit yes, it will do its installations. Hopefully English okay. Next. I agree. Next. And here's some of the features, by the way, and these are some of the features maybe I'll talk about. I can't zoom in, but auto completion, file function lists. It's got some plugins as well. We'll talk about plugins because they're like what's over here, which is called extensions, I believe. Some themes, you definitely want some themes. iCandy to change the visual effects. We've got themes on this editor as well, so I'll definitely be talking about that because it makes a difference. Context menu entry, Explorer context menu entry for Notepad, open whatever you want in Notepad++ from Windows. So that's a very nice feature as well. So there's all these things. It's got localization and it's unticked. To use Notepad on your favorite languages, install desired languages. Okay, I'm going to bypass that for now, but it's just got all of these things. Install all desired languages. It probably did. I guess it will install languages for me. I'll hit next. Create desktop. I probably didn't even have it running in that respect. Run Notepad++. There we go. Or at least it's upgraded for me. Now I just wonder if I do something like file and then new and then do or maybe I can open an existing piece of Python code if I've got some here. I've got a Y Finance bit of code. I wonder if I just sort of like just drag and drop that. There we go. And how does it look? Okay, fine. That's just it's just a bunch of strings. But here we go. We got to the code bit. And we can immediately see, although this is a tiny bit small, I don't know how the zooming works because I've not used it. Is it? There we go, I can zoom in. So very friendly again. You could argue that, maybe there's other things that do or don't pop up. So for example, like an autocomplete. So maybe I'll try like a print. There we go. We've got autocomplete as well. I wonder if can you hover over it and see some docs on it? No, you can't. But so like it's and it hasn't got the auto closing brackets at the moment. But I presume that's something that you can set up. So there's things that you can have on an editor. So we'll go through some of these things. But again, Notepad++, for example, classified as free. So I'll probably list a couple of editors. You're welcome to mention some more in the comments if you want to, because it'd be quite useful. But we've got VS Code, we've got Visual Studio, very similar but different, because this one is actually free for certain bits, but then is not free. So um, it's got some costs. Some costs. Right. Most of the other ones that I've seen are free. So here we got Notepad++, Sublime. I might zoom in a tiny bit more just for the sake of it. Notepad++, Sublime. I've used Atom. I didn't like it actually, but it was quite complete. Yeah, there's a whole bunch more as well, so feel free to add. There's literally loads of them. In fact, I think I've got some because I did have it up and running before somewhere. That's Visual. I've not used Git. There is code spaces as well, funny enough. There's a lot of online ones too. These Jupyter Labs, Jupyter Notebooks, and things like that as well. So there's a bunch of online things. The online ones, unless you saved your code in some repository, they're good for testing things here and there. But can you save and work on a whole block of code and keep it? Like maybe you maybe have to sync it to GitHub or something like that. But anyway, I'm sure most users, like if you've got the option of a pretty decent free one, versus a very similar, also pretty decent paid for one, that you go for the free one. The next thing is you want it to be quite lightweight. And what do we mean? Well, you're going to download this thing, and you don't want to download something that is like 10 gigs and off size. It might be really well. It probably is can have lots of features if it's loaded with 10 gigs of size, and that's one thing about Visual Studio. It's got some cost, and it's also a large install. Although it kind of like doesn't compete in a way, because it is a full integrated development environment, where these other ones are kind of like lightweight text editors that offer you so many features that they now look like IDEs. But yeah, we go for lightweight, and on the note of lightweight, easy and also easy to install and use. And as you could see, sort of like, I'd not touched Notepad, but I was able to go in and do a lot of stuff very quickly without knowing very much. Here we go, a whole bunch of languages. I use Python. Let's have a look. Python's there. It's got a little dot on it. If I'm looking for JavaScript, it'll be there in the J section. There's languages I've never even heard of in there. Or Erlang, I believe that's a very old language. All of our C languages, C, C Sharp, C++, Camel, COBOL, again an old language, CoffeeScript, a more modern language, CSS. I was expecting to see even the B language actually, which is the language that preceded C. But again, like the whole point is I expect you get TypeScript here. Yeah, you do. So there's a whole bunch of things like that in settings, and probably color settings and what have you, preferences, style config. But anyway, actually quite like this on its own. Line numbers. I want to get line numbers. So things that are relatively easily customizable. So easy to install and use, friendly and customizable. Right. So let's go into that. But again, on that note, I look at Visual Studio Code, and all I have to do is type in Visual Studio Code. The first thing actually that comes up is download. And you can kind of click on it here, code editing redefined, and it really is as simple. It's like a one click and sort of like an installation that's really quite fast. I believe that you can do it very fast as well for the Mac, for Windows, and for Linux. Although I tried to install VS Code on an Oracle Ubuntu instance, and it wouldn't do it for me, and threw me some error messages, and I persevered for about an hour and then gave up and moved to a different editor. There were reasons why, but that wasn't compatible. It's quite odd. But the off-the-shelf stuff does work very quickly. So the Windows user doesn't even have to do anything. Stable build for Windows. The Mac OS one, you've got your stable build, and if you're running Linux, you've got your stable build. And also what I did notice, which was if I do have a terminal open, I can sort of like, let me just open up a terminal if I can. I'm just going to bring a, no, I couldn't do it that way. I'm just going to open up a terminal prompt. So yeah, here's my terminal prompt, and what I'm actually going to do here is go and open up a Ubuntu instance like this, and this is quite cute. So this is the Linux version of it, which I've not used, but I had a little test of it, and possibly at some point in time I will use it. Although why is it not doing anything? Oh, there we go. Okay, time. Welcome to Ubuntu 22.04 long-term thing. But basically, you can type in code and then dot. And then if you didn't have VS Code, it would launch it in your Ubuntu instance. I know that because it would download and install it and launch it. So here we go, and it sort of like launches VS Code for me quite nicely. And I didn't even have to do a download, so it came with the subsystem for Linux. I don't know if it's because I already had it installed or not on my Windows PC or not. So that's kind of like a nice little extra to have. I'll keep the PowerShell there on the side, but I don't think I'll be using it. So yeah, easy to download and lightweight. We don't want like some big thing. And actually, if I click the download, like you see it downloading here, it's a relatively small app. It's 88 megs is what it is. I guess that's like, a dozen pictures or something like that, or a small video. The size of this video will probably be much larger than the entire installation of VS Code. I'm going to go and delete it because I don't need a second copy of it. So show in folder somewhere, wherever it is, and I'll delete that. If I just hit refresh and delete from my folder system, delete. But yeah, it's a tiny application, so it's very, very light, and because it's very light, when you load it, it loads very quickly. So that's a desirable feature. People are going to pick that. Yeah, and then when we go to customizable, we saw that on Notepad++, but over here, for example, okay, I know how to navigate my way around it a bit, but the help files are reasonably easy for most of the settings. I try not to veer away too much from the default settings, but if I wanted a different color theme, I'm on dark modern, but if I felt I wanted some sort of red theme or something, you can change your color theme and so forth. I try not to do too many customizations, color theme, dark modern. So I believe that's that on that part. What now? One thing that you do want is you want to. Here there's a whole ton of applications. Reload required. Okay, fine, like Pylance and stuff. I'll have to do a reload for that. But you can type in anything and sort of like pull in any language. So and I was trying to use C++. So you sort of like type it in, and I have got it installed because I did do it. And it's sort of like a one-click for the installation. Although there is a gripe about C++ in VS Code, which is the Windows version of it doesn't work out of the box very nicely, and you have to go through a whole bunch of instructions, and it's really rather clunky actually. But the other languages like Node and Python and things like that, they work literally, or at least in Windows, they work out of the box immediately. So you sort of like just go to the extensions and type in Python if you didn't have it, and it finds it, and you just click on it and it all works. And that's what you want, because you don't want to kind of like have to muck around too much as a user, especially like if you're a novice. You're just kind of like getting into it. Well, even if you're an experienced user, you just don't want to have to muck around with it. You want your IDE to work relatively quickly and be quite friendly. Like I couldn't remember, but on some videos I like to have the line numbers, because the error gets thrown and you get an error message at a line number, and you want to be able to see it. So you want to see something like line numbers, like really simple things. this isn't even complicated. So you want to see line numbers. One of the other things you want to have, possibly, which is nice. I've had a discussion slash argument about it. I don't know, with my nephew, who he's probably a better coder than I am. He types in everything in. He doesn't want autocomplete. So, but I do. So I'm adding it to the list. Complete, right? And the reason why is something like this is I make typos very often, and I literally, in not this video but the previous video, or not the previous video but the previous video to that, I did something like color equals, I did do this, white, and then I was retyping somewhere else, and this is very obvious now, but color, it was more, it was a bit more intrinsic because it was inside a class, but color, right? And straight away we get this squiggly underscore, so forth. It doesn't exist because I misspelt it. I used the English spelling, and before that I used the US spelling, where when you've got things like that, it's sort of like doing this autocomplete for you. And the other one is, I never opened it, is IntelliSense. Now, that would be more applicable over here, for example, but when I do my list, so that's the autocomplete, when I do the dot, it's got this extra stuff which brings up all of the methods and attributes that are available. Now, if I was to do append, you can see appends popping up, but if I was looking down and wasn't typing this and did append, right, there we go, append, right? We see a couple of things. Right, first of all, it disappeared from the IntelliSense at a certain point in time because it couldn't find it, right? So red flag started coming up. Flag started coming. So I kind of live off of that. And other bit, and my nephew, who's an excellent coder, turned around and said, "Well, I know everything that I do, and I find it annoying, this thing popping up in my face every time." But I'm like, well, I quite like it because I can hit the tab button and complete. And I know that I got it without a spelling mistake. And I used to do a lot of copy and paste just for things like this, color and color, where, you know, and you could say it's bad practice, but sometimes you just make these mistakes. It could be a typo, and it could be more like a fundamental mistake, like, you know, I'm accidentally using both things. So, so there's all of that, and so I've listed that. IntelliSense, I like it. The other thing is, if I hover over the actual function, it tells me sort of like how it's used. In this case, it's not very helpful. There's not that much in there. But on other ones, if you've made a function, so for example, def define a function. That's another thing, by the way, snippets. I'm going to add it on. Right. I do something like define a function hundreds of times, you know, then I want to change the function name to my function. Right, there we go. And I always want to have a doc string by default. My doc string describing the function. Now, it kind of forces good practice into there because I don't know if I had set it up on this one, but I probably will at some point. But def function, no, I didn't. On other ones, I've actually put in like a full complete doc string of what I expect to see with like the args and so forth. So like a bigger, more complete doc string. Again, things like in snippets, what do we get? So like here we go, for iron range, and it sort of like does it for me, and it actually leaves the cursor inside there. So for iron range 100, works quite nicely off the bat. And a try, this one annoys me quite a bit, so I made a try except pattern, and it does this for me because I want to try something, you know, I can then replace the pass statement and exception, and I always like, at least to start with, I'll do exception is E, although you might say that's poor practice because you want to have your correct exception, but it gives me the pattern quite fast. So useful features: autocomplete, IntelliSense, snippets. I like that. Definitely a useful feature, which is right here, which is linting, right? Which is basically correcting errors in place. I'll call it. I don't even know what to call it, but correcting errors in place, which is something like, I've got color wrong here. Here's another one. Like my here's bracket closing. I'm going to add this in here because if I was to do even in my example, my list equals open brackets, we always close the brackets. If you don't close the brackets, you're going to get an error. So you expose yourself to having an error. So here it is, right? Now it's flagged it up as an error. So bracket closing is important. These things all come in one thing. It kind of helps you stop making the basic mistakes. I haven't even got to the debugger yet, which is a very useful feature. So definitely bracket closing. The reason why is every single language, especially the curly brace languages, because you're like, you could argue it's less so for Python because it's a white space language, but if you've got a curly brace language, you are always opening and closing brackets. But even in Python, you are always opening and closing brackets like this as well, because your functions and things like that, everything has brackets. So the auto close of brackets is a tremendous helper, and I know, although initially, like on Notepad, when I did have it up and I opened up the bracket, didn't auto close it, that there'll be a setting for that. And if I was using this as my linter, I would probably do a setting for it. Now the other thing is well, I mentioned the line numbers, so which I put on here, and I can't sort of like find it in this one, or it was not obvious, but it's something like it's the ability to find or tweak things as you can. Now on VS Code, I think you can do Control Command Shift P and then do like line numbers. I don't know, line numbers. No, it doesn't find it there. No. And this is the annoying part, because line numbers, no, I can't find it, so I'd have to look it up, like how do I do line numbers on VS Code, and that's annoying. Now fortunately we have some GPT things, so I could do something like how to do line numbers on, you know, hopefully you can find it quickly. If you have to struggle and look for 10 minutes to get like toggle on and off a feature that you want, so it goes there, Control Shift P, settings, and enter line numbers and press enter. Well, I tried to do that and it didn't work, so open up the commands palette and then go for line numbers, editor line numbers. Okay, so it's something like that. Okay, so I can find it relatively quickly, I think, possibly. Let's have a go of switching line numbers on and off in real time. Control Shift P, editor. No, didn't find it there. Type line numbers and press enter. Okay, I'm just going to do that. Type line numbers and press enter, see what it does. No, definitely don't want that. Close that one down. So an annoying thing, I guess. Settings, Control plus extensions, keyboard user snippets, theme settings, command palette. I think one of them, does it? No, that's a command palette. So yeah, I think there we go. Zen mode controls whether turning Zen mode hide line numbers, controls whether turning on Zen mode hides line numbers. Line numbers, editor line numbers. So I don't know why it didn't come down in IntelliSense. So that kind of like annoys me as a user, because I want to see it. I don't want to chase around for it and have to look for it. Controls the display of line numbers. So it's on by default, but I could switch it off. It's got relative and interval. That's interesting. It offers you some extra features. Probably line numbers are rendered as a distance in lines to the cursor position. Interesting. And then interval. Line numbers are rendered every 10 lines. Okay. It still occupies the left-hand side space, but anyway, I was able to find it relatively quickly. It didn't kill me. It's like a 10-minute job, or a 5-minute job, or a 1-minute job, so it wasn't too bad. If it was painful, then it'd just be annoying, that's all. So yeah, what else? I think that's really it. Now now I go into the gripes, or at least they're the things you kind of like want. If there's any other features that you feel that are useful or will draw you to an editor, it'd be useful to hear. This red line was quite useful, and again, I think in some editors it gives you that, and that's for coders where if you're in Python, they have the Zen of Python, but just generally speaking, you don't want your lines of code to get too long. You don't have to wrap text or something like that, but you sometimes get these horrendously long lines of code. We want to avoid long lines of code, and this thing here is quite good. It's actually better than you think. So something like this video, for example, if I'm zooming in on the text, it's good practice to not have your code lines too long. If you're writing a book or something or publishing something, again, it just won't fit on the page. So some people argue against the length of the line, but having this kind of like little bean thing here is quite useful. And I don't know if did that exist on. It didn't exist naturally over here on Notepad++, but it might have done, or you could. I'm sure that you could add that feature. So there was that. Okay, actually one extra thing, debugging. Debugging, and I'm going to say, or debugging for short, although all of this linting stuff has kind of like really helped with making lots of error. And actually another thing which comes here, I think it's called, I can't remember the phrase for it now, like the beans or something like that, which is this little bit, if I do the double control on, which is this little bit over here, because you can see this yellow line, which is highlighting this color thing over here, and you can see this red line, which is highlighting this over here. Can't remember what this thing's called, but you can sort of like move, you can move around it. But yeah, it kind of like highlights the entire pattern of everything, so that's quite useful to have. But anyway, we go on to the debugging. So let's remove our error message here, and we can remove our unclosed bracket over here. The nice thing about the linting is it actually tells you view like no quick fit was not closed, right? I mean, how good's that, right? You know, I'm an idiot. I forgot about it. It's colored it in red. It's put a squiggly red line underneath it, and it's told me my error message as well. So debugging. It belongs with the debugging and linting, which is clear error messages. Very helpful, right? Again, like if you're a pro, you might not need any of that. You'll never make you'll always close your brackets. But if you're like the human beings of us, like who make mistakes all the time, or just the fact that it's one less button pressed, because when I open a bracket, I expect it to be closed. So clear error messages. But let's go into the debugging. We want a debugger, and we want a debugger to work relatively simply, and I can put a little breakpoint in here, and I can run my code like this, and hopefully it will go into the debugger, and it does, and I can sort of like, I can even see my list over here. Like if I hover over it, there's my list, and it's got all of the bits in it, but I could put my list straight into the debugger over here, hit return, and it will give me my whole list in there and break it down, which is quite nice. And I can remove the other items that I was previously debugging for in some other version, and I continue with the run. And there we go, I got a break. This is something to do with the Python coding and the hints, but again, we want to be able to read our error messages relatively nicely. So, if we get to this, but finally, I'm going to close this little piece down because we don't need a debugger open, but there's some extra nice features that we want added in. So we want it to look like an IDE. Now, one thing that we don't want to have to do is every time we write our code, we sort of like come into here and then do Python and then our piece of code. Python and then whatever code though. If I could actually type whatever we wanted, and that's actually a case in the example. I don't want to do that. I want to hit F5 and have it run and sort of like launch itself somewhere. So I can hit the F button, and this is called the integration. So nice features integration. Now, you could call it an integrated development environment, which is what it is. You want it to be close to that. What is this integrated development environment? It's kind of like, here is the run here, and I was doing F5 for the keyboard shortcut, so I could run with debugging and run without debugging. Let's run it without debugging, just so you can see it's run there, and it's kind of like run there, and I guess I've got the break on the append over here, so let me just get rid of that. But let's just run again without debugging, which is Control F5, so I can sort of like do it with my keyboard like this, and it runs without debugging, and there we go. And I can run it with the debugger on, although it would hit the breakpoint, so I'll remove the breakpoint. Now I just hit F5 and everything runs. But importantly is this part here, which is the terminal. I've got a Jupyter notebook. I can show that as well. We've got a terminal, a debug console, output, and problems. So there's a whole bunch of things that are that you've got extra. And this is like an integrated terminal. And if I do, it was Control J is a shortcut. You can sort of like have it on or have it off. The integrated terminal, switched on, switched off. But your code runs straight into that, so you no longer have to have something like this and run your code externally. But the nice thing is that it actually offers both, I think, which is here. You can set up both, so I can actually have it launch in an external terminal, and sometimes I do, because I don't want the app just always to run in here, because maybe it's a bit bigger. I want it running on the side while I'm doing other coding. So like, you've got these nice options that you can have. So it's making it like an IDE. And one nice thing that you have, and this is this percentage plus plus, this hash %%, which is quite nice. It exists in VS Code, which is the interactive Python. And if I remove it, you see that little line disappear. But what it actually does is it lets you break your lines of code into smaller pieces. So I could do something like this, hash %% over here. And it's broken it into a cell, and then hash %% over here. And now I've got a little cell of code. And if I press Control Return to run it, it's going to open up just this little block of code that I've run on the side. So it's quite a nice little feature to have. So all of these things, and again, ever since discovering some of these features, so the interactive Python, ever since discovering some of these features, you tend to use in your standard editors, like Visual Studio Code, which is the full IDE, you tend to not need it as much, because all of a sudden the debugging goes down, because you can sort of like debug in line quite fast and quite simply. So that's quite good. And also, like, I can go and inspect something, so I can do, just to make sure that my list, I can go and look at my list and the second element in my list and run it and Control Return, and it goes and finds me the T. Element number 0, element number 1, element number 2. So we can just do some cute things like this on the side as well, and it's all part of the environment. So I think I've gone on long enough. The one thing is getting C++ working on it, and I will be migrating towards that as well, because C++ is iterating towards Python, and I'm probably going to do a little video on it. And Python's iterating towards C++, and I'm going to do a video highlighting the reasons why that is the case, because it's quite interesting that two very different languages that kind of like came from the same predecessor and work in a different way. C++ is sort of like designed for speed, and Python is designed a bit more for convenience. That the C++ people want a bit more convenience, and Python people want a bit more speed. So they're sort of like migrating towards each other. But that's it. I'll leave the video here. If you have any comments, any other editors you want to mention, any things that I've missed and so forth, feel free to add that into the chat. If you liked this video and if it was helpful, feel free to put a like and a follow and so forth. It's very helpful if you do a follow. And yeah, if you have any other comments or any other questions, it's always useful, or any other comments for any other videos, that'd be helpful as well. And I sign off here, so thanks.